Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with strawberry whip in a black sesame tuile. That's right, I did not invent whipped strawberry cream, but I think I might have perfected it. And besides showing you how to make one of the easiest, simplest, best strawberry desserts ever, I'm also going to show you how to make a crispy, edible cookie bowl, which even if you never make the strawberry whip, is definitely a technique every cook should know. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with some gorgeous, perfectly ripe and sweet strawberries, which I would have loved to use, except that's not what these are. What these were early season, just okay strawberries. But the good news is, even if your strawberries aren't perfect, this recipe's still going to come out amazingly well. And what we'll do after first taking off that green top is we will cut our berries in half, and then I like to cut them into a relatively small dice by cutting those halves into strips. And then once that's accomplished, we'll turn that and slice across every, quarter inch or so. Or you decide on the exact size, but try to keep it consistent. And to be clear, even if they're not really consistent, the recipe will still work out fine. But it is nice when you're enjoying this, that any still whole pieces of berry in the whip are sort of the same size. Otherwise, it might just feel a little weird, getting small pieces and then a big giant chunk. But anyway, do your best. That's all we ever ask. And then what we'll do is take 1 packed cup of those diced berries, and we'll transfer those into a mixing bowl. And then to those we will add a little touch of white sugar. And then once that's been dumped in, we'll take a spoon, and we will mix this thoroughly until that sugar disappears and everything gets a little bit syrupy looking. And yes, of course we can adjust the amount of sugar depending on how sweet our berries are. Okay, for just barely sweet berries like this, I'll use about a 1/4 cup of sugar. But if the berries are super sweet, I might knock that down to 2 or 3 tablespoons. And I invite you to do the same. All right, that's just you cooking. And that's it. Once our fruit's been sugared, we'll go ahead and lay some plastic over the top. And then we'll leave that spoon right in the bowl, because we're going to pop this in the fridge for at least 2 hours. And every once in a while we want to pull it out and give it a mix with the spoon. And I would say letting these macerate, which is what it's called when you mix fruit with sugar, for about 2 hours would be the minimum. But you can definitely go longer if you want. And while our strawberries are macerating, we can move on to make our black sesame tuile cups. And that will start by separating 1 egg, because all we're going to use for this is the white. And of course I'm going to save that yolk for a little, custard or something, allegedly. But anyway, once we have that white separated, we will add a little pinch of salt, plus some white sugar, followed by a little bit of vanilla extract. Oh yeah, the pure and the real. And then we'll finish up with some melted butter. And then last but not least, our flour. And we'll simply take a whisk and mix this until we have a very smooth batter. And by the way, culinary instructors all over the world are going nuts right now, because we definitely skipped a few steps. Okay, you're supposed to mix the egg white and the sugar first, and then I think it's the butter and the vanilla and then the flour and so forth. But I'm very happy to report that if you just dump everything in and mix it really well for a minute or two, it comes out exactly the same. And that's it. Once our batter's been mixed, we'll take a spoon and we will transfer that onto a Silpat lime baking sheet. And we'll probably need like 1 big heaping spoon per tuile, since we want to be able to spread it out to about a 5.5-inch circle. And because I'm filming, I'm only going to do 2, since you have to work really fast with these. And if you've never done these before, you might have to practice a little bit getting the proper thickness. Or if they're too thin, they're harder to work with. And if they're too thick, they don't have that light, crispy texture. So you can try to mimic the thickness I'm getting here, but don't feel bad if it takes you a batch or 2 to get this down. And by the way, the effort is totally worth it, as these things are super versatile. And then once we have those shaped, because I wanted black sesame tuile, I decided to sprinkle these generously with some black sesame seeds, which I thought would taste really nice, but also look very provocative. And that's it. Once you add as many seeds as you think it needs, we can transfer that into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 10 to 12 minutes, or until they're nicely browned around the edges and they look kind of like this. And then to make our bowl shapes, what we'll do is quickly but carefully get those off the pan. And by the way, the first ones are the hardest. But what we'll do is press those down while they're still hot into a bowl. And then we'll use another smaller bowl or ramekin to press it down and hold it into shape. And you really do have to work with this quickly, Because if they cool down like this second one, which by the way, I should have popped in the oven for another 30 seconds to heat it up again. But anyway, as they cool down, they get really stiff and they're much, much harder to form, which is why this one didn't look as good. But as you know, I don't mind showing you the worst case scenario. And even though that one was a little more challenging, it still came out looking fairly nice. And while they are soft and flexible hot, as soon as these cool down, they get very crisp and crunchy. And they make a perfect edible cup for all kinds of desserts. Okay, so those are not too bad, except for two things. I thought these should be a little bit darker and a little bit bigger. So that's exactly what I did on the next two. I made them slightly larger and let them cook another minute or two. And because I wasn't filming, I was able to shape them perfectly, since I was able to do it a lot quicker without having to move a camera and a tripod. But even though those were better, I still wasn't 100% happy. So I did one more version you're going to see later. But for now, since we do have some tuile cups made, let's move on to the finishing of our strawberry whip. Whoosh! So I went ahead and pulled out my strawberries, and I gave it a nice mix. And you can see all that gorgeous, beautiful, sweet strawberry syrup that's been formed. And then to this we will add the only other ingredient needed, which is some ice-cold heavy cream. All right, the colder the better. And we'll pour that in and we will start whisking. And we will keep whisking until this gets exactly as thick and stiff as we want. Oh, and what makes this version superior, in my opinion, is that we're whipping the cream and the strawberries at the same time. Whereas most versions have you whip the cream and then fold the berries and syrup into it. And the reason people do it that way is they think adding all the berries and the juice to the cream is going to prevent it from whipping up properly. But it actually doesn't. And by doing all this together, we're kind of bruising those berries and pulling out even more flavor. And I think what we end up with is far superior. And please note, just like when we're whipping plain cream, if you go too far, you'll eventually make butter. So do not go that far. Right, as soon as this gets stiff enough to hold a shape, that's when I think we should stop. And that's it. Before we serve this up, let's go ahead and give it a taste. Even though I knew it was going to be fine. But I still wanted to taste it anyway. And it was awesome, as it always is. So I went ahead and served that up in our black sesame tuile cup. And after spooning that in, I decided to garnish with some diced fresh strawberries. And then eventually a nice sprig of mint, because it's spring. And once I was finished, I thought it looked fine. But I did have two major issues. All right, first of all, once it was on, I did not like how that diced strawberry looked. Okay, sometimes when we garnish with diced things, it can be distracting. Or as we call it in the business, distracting. But also besides that, I wanted there to be black sesames on both sides of the tuile, and also more of them. So I had an idea. I decided to make another tuile cup, but this time I put the black sesames right into the batter, so that once baked they would show up on both sides. So I think this is probably the best way to go. But to hedge my bets, I also sprinkled some over the top too. And that's it. I went ahead and baked that one exactly the same way for about 12 minutes. And I shaped that the same way as the first batch. And I could see almost immediately I'd accomplished exactly what I wanted. All right, more black sesame seeds visible on both sides. So it took me an extra batch to figure out. But all's well that ends well. And I really did like the appearance of this one much better. So I went ahead and filled this new and improved one with our strawberry whip. And I was happy I'd solved the problem with the appearance of the tuile. But I was also looking for a better looking garnish, which is why instead of diced strawberries, I crushed a few into a puree and then passed it through a strainer to catch the seeds. And then I drizzled that over the top, which I thought looked significantly better than the dice. And of course, yes, I also finished this one with the mint sprig. That is mandatory, especially if you have a whole bunch growing wild in your backyard, like we do. And that's it. Now that I've perfected the appearance, or at least to my eye, I went ahead and dug in. And that, my friends, is just a magnificent way to enjoy fresh strawberries. And despite this being so super light, the intensity of the strawberry flavor really is impressive. And if you've never enjoyed them in this ultra simple format, you really, really should. And while this would be very good plain, when we enjoy it alongside that crispy, crunchy, really thin sugar cookie, everything just gets a little bit better. And I thought those black sesame seeds really did add a little something. Okay, I'll admit they were mostly for appearance, but besides the visual advantages, that little bit of nutty flavor they provide really works so well with the strawberries. And yes, I did make the simplest version of strawberry whip possible, but if you want to upgrade yours with a little bit of lemon zest, or a little bit of vanilla, or maybe a fancy modernized version with some sweet herb like basil or tarragon, that would be really good here. So please feel free to experiment. I mean, you are, after all, the Marquis de Sade of whether your strawberry whip is old-fashioned or mod. Although having said that, I'd be careful not to overcomplicate this too much. All right, the strawberries and cream should really be the stars. Oh, and I should mention, if you're not into the edible bowl shape, there are lots of different things you can do with your tuiles. You can leave them flat, or roll them into cigars, or really, as long as they're hot, any other shape you want. But no matter what shape you make them, or whether you even make them at all, this strawberry whip is one of my all-time favorite simple desserts, which is why I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.